I didn't plan to become a counselor for the strange and unexplainable, but over the years, as I taught meditation classes and opened myself up to counseling work, a weird pattern formed. I say weird a lot. People came to me not just with stress, heartbreak, or anxiety, but with stories that tested the boundaries of what I used to call real. UFO sightings, encounters with greys, glimpses of mantis beings, voices with no body, premonitions that later came true, shadow figures that loomed in doorways at night. And these weren't always people who lived on society's fringes. Many were parents, professionals, or students. They held jobs, paid bills, and looked normal. But inside, they carried experiences that they couldn't explain. Experiences that haunted them or reshaped them. And from my understanding, they needed someone who wouldn't laugh or dismiss them. For reasons I can't fully map out, despite desperately trying, they seem to have found me. At first, I clung to a neat version of reality. You know the one. Science on one side, spirituality on another, with psychology and culture somewhere in the middle, filing everything into labeled folders. But hearing enough of these stories softened those categories, maybe eliminated some of them entirely. Reality began to feel porous, a description that I had heard before, but never truly felt. Kind of like a window screen, where the air, bugs, and sometimes other things somehow flowed in and out. My role shifted, either intentionally or by some automated adaptation into something different. Not to explain, but to witness. Not to decide if they were true, but to hold them with empathy and love. The modern experiencer, a term I'm slowly getting comfortable with using. Someone who encounters UFOs, shadow beings, or paranormal visitors tends to feel isolated. If you try to think bigger picture, or would it be big picture, or look at the meta, human history has always been full of these figures. History has always had experiencers. Shamans and medicine people across the world acted as designated experiencers. Through drumming, fasting, or plant medicine, they met animal spirits, ancestors, and sky beings. Their visions weren't dismissed as delusions, they were community resources, and in some surviving cultures, to this day, still are. Mystics and saints in Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism often spoke of luminous beings, angelic voices, or journeys into non-ordinary realms. Hildegard of Bingen saw radiant beings. Islamic mystics recorded encounters and dreams and visions that shaped theology itself. Believers and followers of these religions don't discount these experiences, but sometimes are harsher with modern-day experiencers, claiming that at some point in history, the divine put a stop to these types of encounters. Indigenous traditions in North America describe star people, dream guides, and shapeshifters woven into everyday stories. Beings who blurred the line between human and otherworldly. There are, of course, other indigenous traditions that follow the same pattern, or ones that these follow. Aboriginal Dreamtime stories are one of them. But I'm not here to correctly describe the chronological order in which humans experienced and shared things, simply to tell you that this happened. In the past, societies often had ritual frameworks, plans, systems, traditions to integrate these visions. Today, experiencers often have no container, I guess, unless you count Reddit, a million podcasts looking for views, and maybe me. That lack of cultural structure is why so many experiencers feel lost, at least to me. History shows us that they aren't new. What's new is that they're adrift in a skeptical, materialist, and forgive me for saying this, shallow culture that has little language for them. Modern psychology, which honestly to me is a little gross, offers some explanations, I guess. Sleep paralysis explains why countless people report waking to see shadowy figures pressing on their chest. It's terrifying, but well documented. Temporal lobe epilepsy and neurological events can generate vivid hallucinations of voices or beings. Trauma and dissociation can create intrusive images and sensations that feel utterly external. And still, neuroscience can't fully explain the convergence. Why do experiencers across continents see such similar beings? Obviously, according to some, because the human genetic and neurological profile spawns similar aberrations regardless of where we are. Why greys, mantis figures, or shadow people? Why do their stories so often come with coherent messages, warnings, comfort, or lessons? Some scholars, like Carl Jung, who I'm not a huge fan of, suggested these are archetypes of the collective unconscious. In the Middle Ages, there were demons or angels. Today, they're aliens and shadow people. But whether archetype or entity, their impact is tangible. Fear, awe, disorientation. These classic feelings leave marks as deep as any physical wound. The Greys, with their big heads and eyes, crystallized in the 1960s after the abduction story of Betty and Barney Hill. Crystallized in terms of American and Western culture, that is. Mantis beings bring up both insect dread and echoes of Egyptian gods. And shadow people line up almost perfectly with old European and Middle Eastern folklore about night terrors. It's honestly really tempting to say, well, people see what culture primes them to see. And that's true in some ways, but it also raises a deeper question. Why do cultures prime us with these figures in the first place? Maybe imagination is a kind of transceiver, as countless people through history have said. And when human minds stretch under stress, grief, or altered states, they tune into forms that are timeless and transcultural. What makes form timeless, though? Dismiss them as hallucinations if you want, but culturally, they seem to function as mirrors of our deepest fears and transformations. It doesn't matter if they're real or imagined. These archetypes insist on being seen. So where does that leave me? Not as an investigator, not as a debunker, but as a witness. I'm used to dealing with prosaic but still horrific trauma, the kind that people make TikToks about, go to jail for, or live in perpetual substance abuse from. Not this. But you could say that through experience, I'm learning. When someone whispers, "I thought I was losing my mind," The most healing thing I can usually say is, I believe you had this experience. Tell me more. That moment, which feels really special, energetically at least, when it occurs, of being believed without judgment, can dissolve years of shame in an instant. Because whether the shadow figure exists in an objective sense isn't always the point. The lived experience, the terror, the awe, the rupture of daily life, to someone who has been through his own struggles, is real enough. In counseling, I don't try to pull them back into normal. I hold the space so they can metabolize it. That was a weird word to use. Maybe process is better. But in doing so, I've learned something important. Listening itself is a form of healing. I guess, which I say a lot lately, I think there's something peculiar that happened during this process. The more of these stories I've held, the less sure I am of the world I live in. My supposed understanding of reality, that firm, comforting ground, has softened, maybe even melted entirely into nothingness. Once I thought I knew what the world was, a mix of biology, psychology, spirituality, and mystery. Now I'm way less certain. Every story adds an oddly detailed and interesting wrinkle. Every night visitation adds a question mark that I'm sometimes afraid to pursue. At times it does seem like a gift. Certainty is brittle. It left me feeling okay. But mystery, though relatively uncomfortable, is fertile, dynamic even. It makes you slower to judge. It keeps you humble. It reminds me that we're all experiencers of something, even if our something looks ordinary. Experiencers might not just be people with strange stories. They may be messengers of something deeper. Not necessarily aliens. Never say never, though. But reminders that human imagination and perception are vast, fragile, and still mostly unmapped. By listening to them, we learn to expand our definition of reality. We remember that what we call real has always been larger than our categories. So yes, I don't know what the world is anymore. Did I ever? But I do know this. People need witnesses. Empathy often matters more than explanation. And maybe, again a big maybe, in the act of witnessing, we begin to encounter a truth that doesn't need to be proven to be felt.